Morning, everybody. Welcome to Kenya Fertilizer Platform Digital Soil Mapping webinar. I believe this is the first webinar held by the Kenya Fertilizer Platform. Today, I'll be the moderator of the webinar. My name is Philip Karuri. I'm supporting IFDC as an agricultural input specialist. And with me, I'll be having Ade Vegan, who will be supporting us on logistics on connectivity. Ade, could you probably introduce yourself?
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Thigpen. I am the head of communications with IFDC. I'm based in Alabama in the United States. And I will be here kind of in the background, making sure that everything runs smoothly. If you have a question for me or have any technical difficulties, please reach out to me and I'll try to resolve them. But I'm looking forward to a great webinar, so thank you.
Thank you, Ade, for that introduction, and we appreciate your support and all the work you have done to connect us. Yeah. 2018, during the Kenya Fertilizer Roundtable meeting, soil fertility and acidity was identified as a key priority. Hence, that's how Kenya Fertilizer Platform Secretariat, the co-chairs at IFDC came up with the idea of organizing this webinar. At this juncture, I would want to point out that IFDC is currently the secretary to the platform. The objectives of today's webinar on digital soil mapping are to present the Kenya Soil Fertility Status Map platform and portal and to showcase its utility. Secondly is to try and make an impact on today's participants by demonstrating how the mapping portal will work and provide for their learning and solutions. It's also to encourage support for participants or others in the mapping exercise to both fill gaps and to create awareness of the value of the maps for targeting fertilizers. Lastly, to get feedback from you, the participants, through your inputs and variable ideas by sharing your experience and endorse the portal as a variable resource. The structure of today's webinar is that we will have the key guest speaker, that is the Principal Secretary, Professor Ahmad Boga, for the inaugural speech, followed by the presentation of the soil mapping portal by Mr. Jeremy Cordingley of Crop Nutrition Laboratory Services, CropNuts. After that, we will have panel discussions and questions and answers sessions. We will have brief presentation on today's webinar, summary of the discussions and a way forward. Then a photo of thanks and closure of the webinar. We will kindly ask you to use the chat or question functions on the control panel to ask questions to the panelists. Ade, I would want probably to know whether the PS already has joined us. Ade?
Yep, Philip, I don't see the PS yet at this point. I'm looking through the attendee list right now.
I'm also going through it. Can see him.
Yep.
Would we go right on with Jeremy? Then we can probably can do it after Jeremy.
Yep, I think that sounds great.
Yeah. Let me point out that we are still waiting for the PS, who is going to join us in a minute. And while we are waiting for him, we can go ahead and we request Mr. Jeremy Cordingley. Mr. Jeremy is the founder and the managing director of Crop Nutrition Laboratory Services, CropNuts. And today, he is going to give us introduction on soil mapping and the application of digital soil maps, data in the portal, how the portal works, and what the maps and portal can be used for. Jeremy, please go ahead and give us the introduction. Karibu, Bwana Jeremy.
Thanks, Philip. So I will now present the work around the digital soil mapping. Andy, would you allow me to present? Thank you. So today I will present the Kenya Soil Mapping Project. This is an interim presentation. My name is Jeremy Cordingley, Managing Director of CropNuts, Crop Nutrition Laboratory Services. This project is a partnership between CropNuts and IFDC. IFDC contracted CropNuts to do this work earlier in the year. So for those of you that don't know CropNuts, what we do, we're a soil science, soil testing, soil mapping company with a wide range of laboratory tests and including mobile soil testing labs and digital agronomy services. So all of us here listening and in the fertilizer industry are looking to build a food secure Africa. And something that's very clear with this image on the left is that declining yields are often related to nutrient depletion. There you can see the map of Africa, and especially those countries in red. We have an annual nutrient depletion rate, which is far in excess of the nutrients that are being restored to the soils. This is similar to a bank balance where we're actually getting in debt in terms of our soil and nutrients. So we must look at soil fertility and nutrient management in a much more holistic and urgent manner. In terms of the yield gap, Africa there on the right, the yield gap is still very large compared to those regions on the left. So the yield gap of 70 to 80% in some cases is still a real problem in building a food secure Africa. In relation to that, it's been found, and I think everyone's aware, that soil fertility in itself is actually causing up to 45% of that yield gap. So it follows that in order to get our continent into a food secure position, that quality soil information is absolutely key. I like to show this slide because it helps us all to just focus the mind on what we're actually doing when it comes to balanced nutrition. And this is known as the law of the minimum. So basically it's balancing soil fertility management for higher yields. You'll see 5 scenarios starting on the left, scenario 1. And the size of the plant is indicates the yield of that particular scenario. In many cases, like scenario 1, yield can be limited by a specific nutrient. In this case, and this is just an example, the nutrient that's limiting yield here is phosphorus. So it doesn't matter how much nitrogen or potassium we put onto the soil, the yield will always be limited by the lowest nutrient. As we balance nutrition and we move to scenario 2, and you can see now that the yield has been limited by potassium in terms of NPK. That might be a scenario where we've used a fertilizer such as DAP, but actually potassium might be limiting the yield. And so through information, soil mapping, soil testing, by understanding what we're doing and by starting to doing validation trials, we're starting to increase the yield by adding in these nutrients. In scenario 3, we've added in NPK, and the yield has come up further, and so forth. So scenario 4 now is where IFDC in particular have been doing a lot of work around secondary and micronutrients, and these are the nutrients such as sulfur, such as magnesium, and in scenario 5, and this is again where the fertilizer industry is now moving into adding and formulating fertilizers that include nutrients such as boron and zinc, copper, for example. So that we're moving from scenario 1 to scenario 5, and we can't get to scenario 5 until we really understand what the limiting factors are in our soils. So why soil mapping? So soil mapping is a valuable tool because it helps us to understand and get visibility on variability. So currently, a lot of recommendations, although we're moving away from it, which is a great to see, but is what we call blanket fertilizer recommendations. So these are recommendations that are given and applied over a wide range of area. This obviously would lead to suboptimal fertilizer recommendations for farmers. It means that all soils within a region would be treated the same or in a similar way. And of course, that will lead to low economic return on fertilizer use. So by carrying out soil mapping, we get much better visibility. The map on the right is a map of Africa and all the different soil types. All the different soil types have different soil conditions, different soil fertility levels, and even within a soil type, there will also be variations based on topography and rainfall. So that causes immense amount of variation in soil fertility status within regional areas. So by carrying out soil mapping, we'll start to understand the regional soil fertility status and the variations of that fertility, especially with in terms of soil pH, so that's acidity, the macro and micronutrients, like I've just explained, organic matter as well. Identification of likely nutrient deficiencies, understanding where these deficiencies are likely to happen. These maps can also inform high-level lime and fertilizer use policies. And we can also have more targeted national soils and crops research programs. And of course, if we put all this together, we're going to get higher economic returns on fertilizer use. So in terms of the project scope, which I'm presenting now, the project scope was to develop soil fertility status maps for 21 high productivity counties in Kenya, using both pre-existing publicly funded soil data with CNLS, together with new sample data where gaps existed in the geodatabase. And together this came to 3,700 soil samples. And you'll see a map on the right-hand side there with the different sample locations mapped out. The actual counties that we focused on were really based on the existing database that we had, and we wanted to fill up and map those counties in a way that gives us the confidence in the mapping process. So it wasn't about going to map new counties, but actually improving where we already had data. So the 21 counties covered Central and Mount Kenya, the Rift Valley and Western as well. And thank you to those organizations where mapping work had been done out in the past already and has contributed to these maps. And for OCP for supporting the work around gap filling in the counties. So the project was supposed to be completed by now, but for obvious reasons, the epidemic has really challenged us in delivering this project. So this is really an interim presentation. And for now, we'll be discussing around the 10 counties that have already been mapped. And those are the ones shown with the, the red sample locations on the left-hand side of the map. Currently, we are ongoing between July and August to complete the additional 10 counties. So soil mapping, how do we do it? So the first step in soil mapping is to have a strategic sampling plan, and this is based on various covariates such as roads, topography, elevation, density of farmland, and existing third-party maps. By having a targeted soil sampling strategy, it means that we can extrapolate the soil fertility parameters with confidence. So that's the first step, soil sampling. The second step is soil testing. So we use wet chemistry analysis in our laboratory here in Limuru to carry out full soil analysis for each of the samples collected. And then the third process is developing the geospatial, geostatistical scripts and process to be able to create the maps and validate the maps so that we make sure that the points and the maps themselves are validated and accurate. And then the output obviously is the nutrient maps, as you see there. So one of the challenges that I've seen over the last 20 years of being in this business is that there are a lot of mapping portals around, but they're quite hard to use. So what we wanted to do was customize our own web mapping portal to be able to handle this type of project and just present the data and the maps in a very simple way. So I'll give you a quick demonstration of the portal just so that the listeners can understand how it works. How do I? Okay, so this is the web mapping portal, and these are the 10 counties currently that we've completed. And the portal itself is very simple. On the left-hand side, we have all the different soil test parameters from pH down through macros, micros to organic matter. We also have the counties listed so that we can zoom into a specific county. And then we also have interpolation maps. In the bottom left, we have the legend, and the legend will change depending on the parameter. So you can see here that this is the legend for pH. So the current map of Kenya that we're looking at now is the pH map. And as we change to a different parameter, you'll see that the legend changes here. So it's very important that we understand what these colors mean. Essentially, the colors are donating the level or indicating the level of a particular fertility parameter, in this case pH. So obviously red is donating the lowest level, orange, and then through to green, which is a more normal optimal level, and then blue is on the high side. So as we look at these maps, we can start to understand what's happening. On the right-hand side, we have a toolbar where we can look at different map views. We can look at the sampling, where the sampling points are. We can turn on the layer around sub-counties and sub-county names. So I'll show you that later. For the purposes of this demonstration, it's not to go through every single county and every single parameter, but just a couple of minutes just to show how this portal can be used. For this case, I'll just zoom into the North Rift, and then I'll turn on the county layers. So by zooming in here, we can start to get some context about the challenges around fertility. So as I look at pH, you can see that in many cases of the North Rift, as many of us are aware, our pH is on the low side, and in certain places, many areas being below 5.2, and therefore we're quite aware that liming as a program is something that we need to understand more. So as you drop down through these different parameters, you'll start to see the variations in soil, not just in the North Rift here, but also in Siaya, which is the one county in Western that we've mapped so far. And then I'll zoom into Siaya in a moment because it's a fascinating county in terms of variability. But some of the big questions that are being asked in the fertilizer industry right now is around, parameters like potassium. So you can see here there's a big divide in terms of the levels of potassium in our soils. Much of the North Rift having potassium levels on the higher side, and then as we move into Western, and certainly as we fill Kakamega County in phase 2, and many of these other counties in Western, we'll start to see much bigger variations in the level of potassium, and of course that informs a big decision between conventional NP fertilizers versus NPK fertilizers. Another question that often comes up is around sulfur, and we can see from this map that sulfur is generally on the lower side. One thing around sulfur that we should be careful of is that the time of the sampling for sulfur actually has an impact on the level, because it's a bit like nitrate, so it can vary from the timing of the sample. But you can see that most parts of the North Rift are on the low side with sulfur. Zinc is little known in terms of its variation and levels. And many parts, again, of the North Rift, and especially in Nandi County or northern parts of Nandi County, are having much lower levels of zinc. So again, this is going back to the question of zinc being put into fertilizers. And again, this starts to help to inform the industry on where the likely problems are. So what I'll do now is I'll just zone into one county, and I've just chosen Siaya for this purpose because it just helps us to see and understand how soil management and fertilizer policies within a specific county might be helped by the use of this portal. So we can see here that the pH in Siaya County there's a huge variation. Down towards the lake, the pH is 6 to 7.5, and as we move north into the more acid, I think these are acrisols, we can see that the pH is coming all the way down to around pH 4.8 to 5. So clearly the need for a liming intervention, for example, is going to be much more likely in the north, whereas in the south and towards the lake, it's not so likely that lime is going to be needed. And even as we drill down, and one of the functionalities that we've added into this portal is a split view, so we can actually start to compare parameters and maps side by side. And excuse me. So I will just zone into CIA here. So this is on the right hand side is a map of the potassium levels. Okay, so here we have potassium, and on the left we have pH. So now we're looking at the same county, and we're looking at two different nutrients. So clearly there's we know that this is a lower fertility soil with acid conditions and low potassium. So already from this split screen and in the county of Siaya, we can be seeing that the need for potassium in many parts of Siaya is Western Siaya is less. As we move north and northeast, that the need for potassium and lime is much likely to have a much bigger impact on yields. So that's the type of use of this map, even down to a county level, that I think will have a great impact. So I'll just remove that split screen for now. So as we continue to look at Siaya and we move down through the parameters, you can start to see the variations of phosphorus, potassium, as we've already viewed, sulfur, for example, also low. So we're starting to see that in CIO we're likely to need lime, different formulations of NPK. In terms of zinc, there are big areas that are low in zinc, in boron as well. Certainly as you move north up towards the cane belt, you're getting a lot more boron deficiencies. So starting to highlight these types of problems in the soils. So what I'll do now is just zoom out, and we'll just move across to central Kenya quickly. So here, just be aware that this is the Aberdares, so obviously that wasn't mapped. And we've also got Mount Kenya up here. So those are the areas that are showing, obviously, the national parks and forests. I think one thing again that's very interesting, if you zoom into a county like Murang'a, is that again, a bit like Siaya, if you take one specific sub-county, actually the liming intervention, because this is a pH map, towards the Aberdares is going to have a much bigger impact. Whereas as you move away, and this is a function of rainfall, that the pH starts to rise. And so the fertility conditions, even within a sub-county, within a county, are changing. And I think that's the fascinating thing about soils, and the reason that we need this type of information to be able to make better decisions on soil fertility. Another interesting county is Embu. You can see again that large parts of Embu are the pH is on the normal side, whereas again, once you move up towards up the mountain, the levels of pH, for example, the acidity starts to increase. Other interesting things in Embu is that we weren't aware of the significance of the copper deficiency in Embu County, but this mapping process is really showing us that unlike other parts of Central, Embu seems to have much lower copper levels, and I think that type of information is so important for the fertilizer industry. So that's essentially the use of the portal, and clearly, as we start to add in the additional counties, much of this area here will be full, and the idea there is to have that done in the months ahead. So what I'll do now is move back to the presentation. So one of the next steps in the mapping portal is to create soil zones. Soil zones are a clustering of areas that have similar soil management properties into soil management zones. We can use these zones to identify trial sites and carry out lime and fertilizer validation trials, because these can then be extrapolated across much larger areas. So we can develop lime and nutrient response probability maps for crops within each soil management zone. We can then improve access to lime and introduce balanced fertilizer formulations within each soil management zones, supported by farm-level soil testing programs. One thing that we work a lot with in IFDC and CalRO and all of us in R&D space is obviously validation trials. So validation trials are essential to validate the findings and making sure that actually what we say is going to work actually does work in practice. So validation trials and the work that we do, lime response trials, these are factorial nutrient response trials, so checking out the response to different nutrients, different crops. Nutrient emission trials, which contain micronutrients and leaving micronutrients out to see what the yield gaps are. And doing these in lots of different crops: maize, potatoes, wheat, canola, peas, sunflower, rice, some of the crops we've worked in. These are our trial sites in different parts of Kenya on the right-hand side. And we also test different varieties and plant populations. And then the testing of new products, so lime products, fertilizer blends, and specialty fertilizers. So the reason that we talk about validation trials is because we really want to get across in this webinar and this process about what the real proper use of these soil maps we believe should be. So we came up with some do's and don'ts for the soil map so that we can all have be aligned on expectations and understandings of how to use these maps. So firstly, we use these maps to understand variations in soil acidity and nutrient deficiencies across the counties. We're going to use these maps to help identify sites for lime and fertilizer response validation trials within counties, sub-counties, and soil management zones. The maps can be used to support lime subsidy programs within counties and different sub-counties within counties, supported by farm-level soil testing. Also, the maps should be used to support fertilizer subsidy programs to bring nutrient-balanced fertilizers to smallholder farmers. Of course, we should always be subsidizing soil and yield improving inputs. And the maps could also be used for assessing agricultural production risks and development intervention programs. Conversely, what we're recommending the maps not to be used for is to start making generic national fertilizer recommendations without validation trials, which are needed in each county and soil management zones. So the point here is not to go from maps to fertilizer recommendations. There has to be the step in between, which is validation trials in the ground. So we shouldn't use the maps for making farm-specific fertilizer recommendations. These maps are not a substitute for soil testing and don't allow for local variation in soils and management practices at the farm level. We also shouldn't use the maps for making lime recommendations to farmers. The rate and type of lime is based on field level pH, soil texture, calcium, magnesium, and will vary from field to field. And we shouldn't also use the maps as a tool for selling fertilizers to farmers. So in terms of the way forward, we have to complete the soil mapping exercise for the additional 11 counties, and that's ongoing. We're going to create soil management zones across Kenya, as I've described. We're going to present probability maps in addition to the maps that you've seen, which help us to better understand soil interpolation risks at scale. Obviously, we're going to take feedback from this webinar and from the stakeholders to help us to improve the final web mapping platform. And then we'll have a final webinar sometime in late September for all the 21 counties. Of course, it's critical that we complement soil mapping work already done by CalRO and other stakeholders, and also to develop a framework and harmonize procedures for updating and expanding the soil maps into the future. So thank you for your attention. At this point, I would also like to thank my team who worked tirelessly through the pandemic, carry out very difficult, challenging soil sampling work, coming to the lab, every analysis done, and to the data science and software development teams as well for working beyond the call of duty. So thank you to all my colleagues, and thanks to everybody for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that enlightening presentation. It's given a clearer picture of what we expect from the mapping portal. Appreciated, and we hope that after the 21, you have more people coming in to cater for the remaining other counties, because it seems that it's important that if we could have the whole country covered, all the counties. For now, it's my pleasure to welcome the Principal Secretary of State Department for Crop Development and Agriculture Research, Professor Hamadi Boga. He has joined us, and we will give him the opportunity, the chance to give us the key speech on the implications of soil mapping to inform policy of the need for nutrient fertilizers and lime industry and how these fit into the national strategy. Welcome, Bwana PS. Karibu sana. Asante.
Me not to switch on the camera, so you'll just hear my voice. I mean, not very suitable environment for pictorials. But let me take this opportunity to thank Jeremy and the team from CropNuts for excellent work. I've seen the presentation. I had seen it also in what was circulated. I think this is the most important conversation for the farmer, for the county governments, and for the national government as we make our investments. We are all investing our resources into farming, be it at the farm level by the farmer or at the county level as they try to support their farmers, or even at the national level as we try to support the farmers with farm inputs, especially fertilizer. I think for a long time, we have been making blind investments that are not informed by data, and we have wasted a lot of money and will continue wasting a lot of money, both at the individual farmer level as well as at the national government program level. Because our interventions have not been informed by such quality and very specific data. Of course, there was some data from CalRO, but I think we largely ignored it and just blindly procured fertilizer reactively. And I think as policymakers, we have to move from there, especially if we have to address the very obvious yield gap that has been demonstrated today in this presentation. As a ministry in the ASDGs, which is our anchor and our North Pole for all our programs, we see this initiative as supportive of three of our pillars. Pillar one, where we are keen to make sure that the smallholder farmers raise their income. I think from data that I have seen, only 8% of farmers test their soils. I think with such soil information available to extension workers, to farmers, to policymakers, let's work together to raise the level of soil testing, even like to 50%. And so beyond producing the data, we have to have a framework for disseminating the data and interesting the farmer and the policymakers in the science of soil testing, because it's key in addressing the soil gap by giving the plant the nutrients that are deficient in your particular type of soil in the farm. I am the son of a smallholder farmer. My father was a civil servant, and I had a 12-acre farm. And I saw him struggle. He did all the right thing, but he never tested soil. I never saw him once in test soil. So it was trial and error. You added, sometimes it produced, sometimes, and he tried to do maize of all crops in the coast region. This time around, about a month ago, 6 months ago, I invited KeFERT, and I said, let's do a demo farm, because I'm not a farmer, but let me do a demo farm, because I'm the PS crops. Maybe I can show my neighbors how to grow crops properly. And the first thing they did was soil testing. And they told me, oh, your soil is acidic, pH, I don't know what. So we have to correct the acidity. And I said, these guys here never use fertilizer. How is it acidic? I thought acidity comes from DAP. I said, no, from leaching, because our soils are very sandy. So it was a very interesting conversation, because even myself, I had not thought about it. And we did the demo farm. And the maize grew almost like anywhere else. And other crops grew. It became so lush. And I used it to take you through and to tell them you can't sleep hungry. It's possible for you to feed yourself and family and make some income. Because I know most of them are on a settlement scheme and they have 12-acre farms. And they buy their tomatoes at 20 shillings in Ukunda. The tomato that is coming all the way from Loitoktok. So I think this gives us possibility, but I think it's the way we will communicate it and the way we will work with counties and other actors to sync this knowledge. I've seen this in a conversation with Stuart Baden at his farm. And when you go there, the first conversation you have with him is about soil and zero-till and soil fertility and soil carbon. So the category of farmers that is commercial, they understand this. But our burden is because maybe 90% of our farmers are smallholders, and many of them above 60 years old, and maybe soil science is not really something that they comprehend. So I think we need to find a way to move it there, behavior change as a way of increasing their incomes. In the ministry, we are also reforming. The fertilizer program has now been changed in National Value Chain Support Program. And I encourage all programs in the ministry where you are dealing with farmers and addressing the issues of productivity to put a soil component there, because I think it's key. And it's one of the ways in which we are going to drive adoption of the necessity of doing soil testing. And I hope in this forum there are representatives from counties. If not, I hope we can organize webinars in September to make sure that all those counties where testing has been done, we present it to them, and probably not just at the policy level, but also their technical people who are actually doing the work on the ground. But I think we're on the right path. I support this, and I appreciate that the platform gives us an opportunity to interact and share around the very fundament of agriculture, which is the soil and its nutritional status. Thank you very much, and let's proceed with the rest of the program. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay, thank you so much, Bwana PS. We appreciate for you finding the time to be with us. I hope that you'll be able to stay with us if you can. If you can, probably we'll share with you the proceedings of the webinar. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our panel discussions and question and answer sessions. I would like to remind you to ask questions. As I indicated earlier, use the chat or question function on the control panel to ask questions to the panelists. If possible, indicate to which panelist the question is directed to. However, some of the questions may be general, and any panelist will react to such questions. The questions will be answered after the presentation by the panelist, so keep sending your questions. We also hope the panelists can see questions addressed to you. I hope you are able to do that. If you don't, we are going to read them, and also when we come to that, we'll be reading them to you. Thank you very much. Now, our first panelist for the day is Dr. Bure Renaiya. Dr. Renaiya is Agricultural Transformation Coordinator in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries, and Irrigation. She is going to give an overview of the implications of soil mapping to inform policy on the need for multi-nutrient fertilizers and liming, and how these fit into the agricultural transformation and growth strategy. Karibu Daktari, welcome.
I had corrected the team. I'm not doctor, unfortunately. That's my father. But thank you, Philip, for that introduction. And there's Prof as well, who's given us, thank you, who's given us an overview. As the Agriculture Transformation Office Coordinator, my responsibility is to coordinate and performance manage our agriculture sector strategy in terms of growth and transformation. And from these discussions, it is important for us to ensure that we create an enabling environment for us to increase the use of either multi-nutrient fertilizers, as well as ensure that we have done our appropriate soil testing and soil mapping with support from companies such as CropNuts as well as IFDC, because we have realized the importance that even though we work on ensuring that we increase fertilizer availability through our fertilizer subsidies, now moving towards the e-voucher program, which will be launched in the next month. It is important that our beneficiaries, the beneficiary farmers, use the appropriate inputs to maximize output at production level. So for me, generally, not as a Daktari, but rather as ensuring that we translate, for example, what PS Boga's State Department works on with regards to policy development. We support in ensuring that the private sector can participate, and whilst using, and what we discussed recently with IFDC team was the SMART approach, where we ensure that our small-scale farmers, through the Big Four agenda, increase their yields whilst reducing the cost on production. So for me, on those short introductory remarks, thank you, Philip. I'm looking forward to the continued discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Renaya. And we hope, as you said, the presentation by the PS, and we hope that probably with the agricultural transformation and growth, we can follow up on the issue of taking the webinar further to the counties. I hope that can be worked out. Our next presenter for the day, or the panelist, is Mr. Ostis Muriuki. Mr. Muriuki is the chairman of the Fertilizer Association of Kenya. I also would want to point out that Mr. Muriuki is also the co-chair of Kenya Fertilizer Platform, and he is the MD of MEA Limited. Mr. Muriuki, as the chairman of Fertilizer Association of Kenya, is to give an overview on the implications of soil mapping to inform the fertilizer manufacturers and breeders on the need for multi-nutrient fertilizers and their targeting in Kenya.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Karuri, for that introduction. I must say that I need to commend Jeremy for a good job done. It is true that soil testing and even soil mapping has been taking place in this country for many years, but has never been put in the way that this digital team has done it now. Because I know that we go back. I happen to be in a company where I think we were the first private company to set up soil testing laboratories in 1966. And even to date, we still do the analysis. But what is interesting is that the data we have it in our folders. We've never been able to put them in the way they have been presented by Jeremy and his team. And I commend them for that. And what has even come out clearly is that it is true. The information I've been getting, scanty information I've been getting here and there, even when we normally hold these conferences, is that it is true that potassium has been said to be adequate present in these soils, But from the data, it is showing that there are some areas in this country that are deficient in K. And as Jeremy has put it right, is that if any nutrient is limiting, that is the one that will determine the crop yields you are going to get. So the way we have been done using NP, the 2330, the DAP, I think has to change with this information. We need to focus on the multi-nutrient fertilizers that will answer to the problems we are facing as farmers in this country. If I'm not wrong, I think the ministry has done some work on try to appraise the soil fertility status in different counties. Of course, it did not cover all the counties as Jeremy is trying to cover all the 47 counties. But we have information in pieces, bits and pieces, because I remember there was that project was called FURP, Fertilizer Use Recommendation Project, in the late 70s. And there were some validation trials that were also carried out in some areas. But I think that information was never put together in the way it has been consolidated now, so that we'll be able to guide the fertilizer suppliers or the fertilizer users as now that's going to happen. Now, listening to Professor Mboga, I think, you know, I've seen that most of the projects that have been undertaken by the government, they take about 2 to 3 years to come to completion. And I'm amazed that Jeremy and his team, they got the instructions early this year, and now they almost, I think by the end of the year, you'll have completed this sort of mapping. It is credible. Jeremy Hogera. Now, I am thinking that what I wanted to find out from Jeremy is, was there any correlation between, did you find any correlation between the past data and the data that you have been able to collect currently? Because what I'm saying is that there has been a lot of data at NAL or with the Kenya Soil Survey Project. Was there any relationship that you found that was there any relationship from the data you got and what is in our files? The other thing I wanted to also find out is, did you find out any correlation between the soil characteristics and the soil data that you got? What I'm trying to say is this: you know, in the past, we tried to assess the fertility status of our soil by going by the soil types, because every soil type has a certain physical and chemical characteristic, which also inform all the soil fertility status. Did you try to find out any correlation? That is, you know, the soil fertility status and what you found from your laboratory test and the soil tests and the soil types, because because you see, in this soil fertility, as you mentioned, I listened very carefully in your presentation. You also brought in the issue of the topography and the rainfall, which are very important in trying to assess the soil fertility status. Now, I'm happy that I'm in the fertilizer industry. I'll be able to make use of this data that will inform me on the different fertilizer types I need to manufacture for the given areas. And this information, I think, is very important. It's the high time that we will be able to make use of this information, and it will actually go a long way in trying to improve the crop productivity in this country. Listening to Professor Mboga, it appears he has endorsed this work, and I think that's the way it should be. We do not want to reinvent the wheel. That is to say, I do not want to see a situation where the ministry will try to embark on another project to do actually what has been done by Jeremy. So I think this work is very important, and we need to take it seriously. Now that we have been able to get so many fertilizer breeders and other companies trying to set up fertilizer manufacturing facilities in this country, I think this is the information we should use so that we are able to give our farmers the correct fertilizers. And with that, I think we should be able to increase crop productivity in this country. Those are my few remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bwana Muriuki. And as you raise some questions to Jeremy, I think they can be attempted to be answered at the end. When we come to the question and answers later, you can reformulate them and send your questions to us so that we can be able to ask it as we come to the question and answers. It is good that you have mentioned that Mayor Limited has done a lot of work previously. We know you have the labs in Nakuru, and we hope that that could be helpful. Probably could build up into Jeremy's work in future. Probably you can collaborate later. Thank you very much. And our third panelist is Mr. Joseph Arubaka, who is the General Manager, Homerine in Kenya. He is going to give us an overview on the implications of soil mapping to inform the rime industry on the need for rhyming and rhyme targeting in Kenya. Joseph, karibu. We can't
Joseph,
hear you for now.
You're still muted. If you could unmute yourself. I just sent a request to you, so maybe you can click that.
Now you can hear me?
Perfect.
Am I there?
Yes.
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Alubaka. I'm the GM Homerine Company Limited. I'm here to talk about lime. Briefly, is that Homerine started a long time in the 1920s in Homo Bay. We moved to Koru in Kisumu County in the late 1930s, where we now have a limestone deposit in excess of 65 million tons. We feel that at the rate we're mining this limestone, we're not able to exhaust it in the foreseeable future. So we have enough lime to supply the demand, whichever way it comes, in a very long time. Our lime is calcitic in nature, that is rich in calcium, though we have traces of magnesium and phosphorus, which are very important for the crops as well. But I want to thank Jeremy for his presentation. I think this will help the industry, more so the lime industry, in being able to understand where to target our lime marketing. Because one big problem in this country, we believe, is that the soils have become so acidic, and to that extent, farmers are unable to maximize in their production. So by getting this soil map in place, we believe that we are able to reach farmers based on their soil fertility issues and pH problems. But just to mention, our biggest problem or challenge has been the application of lime. Farmers have been misadvised on how to apply lime, the type of lime to be applied, to the extent that there's lime in granules, which is very expensive. So farmers tend to be swayed into applying lime by the holes, by the planting holes, instead of the complete application of lime into the fields. So we want to try probably to take out or to clarify these issues to the farmer so that they understand that lime application is a total spreading of lime on the surface and working that lime into the soil. Because otherwise, if this is not taken care of, then we probably will not be able to achieve the results that we expect. So I think farmers need to be well informed about how to apply lime, when to apply lime, and the type of lime to be applied. I hear Jeremy mention that the soil being acidic is not specific. They still need for more analysis such that you are able to identify which kind of nutrients are lacking to raise your acidity level or to change the pH of the soil. So I think farmers need to be taken out of this confusion in a way that they understand what to apply and when to apply the lime. But I believe that these soil mapping will help the industry, the lime industry. One is to be able to know where to target our marketing, and also to help this country to know where to channel our resources in terms of where do you invest on lime and where do you invest more on fertilizer. That to me would be my contribution. just to try and clear the, the confusion and to tell farmers how to apply the lime. Because as you look at Jeremy's map, I think where you saw the red, it shows that the condition of the soil is critically bad in terms of acidity. So we want to try and sensitize the farming community to be able to apply lime where it is required. But our biggest challenge, which I think all the panelists will appreciate, is changing the tradition. How do you change the tradition so that farmers can adopt liming? Farmers are used to, fertilizer, they're used to DAP, urea, and whatever it is. But then liming is maybe coming up as a new concept, which we need to really get the farmers aware of, so that the tradition where they believe fertilizer, the entire thing is changed. So the tradition should be looked into seriously, because with the soil mapping, if we don't change the mindset of the farmer, then still we will not achieve so much. So it is also the government to come in and try and change the mindset of the small farmer, the mindset of the big farmer, such that at the end of this soil mapping, we're able to use this as a tool to promote our production and to make this country food sufficient. Thank you. That is my presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation. It is good that you have brought up the issue of capacity building.
Thank you, Philip.
In educating the farmers. And I think that's not only online, but also on other other technologies like fertilizer, like how, what, and when to use the lime and other fertilizers. Our next panelist is Stephen Aston, who is the Director of Agricultural Research in KeFERT, who is to give us an overview on the implication of soil mapping to inform the need for multi-nutrient fertilizers and liming in 1 acre farms activities and support to the smallholder farmers in Kenya. Mr. Aston, karibu.
Hey, Philip, I don't see Stephen on the attendee list. I'm not sure if he was available ultimately. Yeah, I don't know if he came, but if he joins, I'll let him know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Otherwise, I hadn't checked on the list who they already there. Thank you for that correction. Then we go to Dr. John Wendt. Dr. John Wendt is a Deputy Director, Field Research in IFDC in East and Southern Africa. He's going to give us an overview on how important soil maps are in research and the need for development of research support. John, welcome.
Yes, thank you. I think the Honorable P.S. Boga's comments were so relevant at the beginning of his presentation when he mentioned that in Kenya we have been flying blind. And from a research point of view, and for actually developing new fertilizers, that has been a big challenge for IFDC in Kenya, not knowing where the predominant deficiencies are, and therefore not being able to target our research in the correct areas. I'd like to just share with you a presentation. Let's see, sorry, I'm going to have to figure out how to open this. Okay, so now I can show my screen and are we seeing this? Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, it's visible.
Excellent. So how does IFDC use the maps? And I would just say this is a general issue for anyone doing research in crop nutrition and trying to develop fertilizers, which is IFDC's expertise. So the first thing it does is it directs us to known areas of nutrient constraints as well as soil acidity constraints. So we know where to do our research. And then it informs us of the extent of those constraints. Is it just a tiny area or is it a large area? And if it's a large area, then it would merit a unique fertilizer formulation. And then we take that information and collaborate with the fertilizer industry so we can develop, test and target improved fertilizers. So we're not seeking through mapping to develop the perfect formulation for every farmer. We know that a blending company can only produce a certain amount of blends, but with proper mapping, we can learn about which blends, and then of course testing, we will learn which blends perform best for the majority of farmers, and we would expect substantially improved yields and economic returns. Let me just go back here. I'll just give the example from Rwanda, CNLS worked with, and I'm just showing some maps of the predominant deficiencies we found there: sulfur, zinc, boron, and copper. So once we had those maps, we were not flying blind. We knew what the deficiencies were. We knew where they were located and where they were not located. And so we were able to work on the formulations. There's a lot to working on formulations, which involves figuring out which kind of nutrients, the source of, say, zinc or boron or sulfur, is it effective? What is the rate? What is an economic rate? And so that's where IFDC works with the industry to develop formulations that are effective. Here's just some examples. I'll just go through them quickly, where we've had very good success of improving over the commodity fertilizers that were available. This is maize in Mozambique, wheat in Ethiopia, where we were able to greatly increase production with sulfur, zinc, and boron addition. And from Rwanda, the climbing beans, obviously the improved formula is on the left, and the rice next to the gentleman, where we were able to substantially improve rice yields by, on average, 1 ton per hectare. So the only question I have for Jeremy is, how do you see Kenya in terms of soil acidity and nutrient constraints compared to other countries you've worked with us on, and as well as us and others? And what are the likely deficiencies that are not being addressed in fertilizers available to most Kenyan farmers? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wendt. And now we welcome the questions. And we have a few which already has come in. I might not be able to answer them in order, but we are going to try as much as possible to cover as much as possible of the questions. Otherwise, thank you, the panelists, for keeping to the time assigned to you. We still have more time to work on the question and answers. So for the next about 20 minutes or so. So let me start with one of the questions, which is from Davis Hillary to Jeremy. Jeremy, the question is, any exciting insights on organic matter during your exercise?
So, excuse me. Organic matter, good question. So compared to a lot of other countries that we work in, the organic matter levels in Kenya are not, in the areas that we've mapped so far, are not too low. For example, if you compare it to the warm, the humid West African soils where organic matter is broken down very quickly, our organic matter levels are actually much higher. In many cases above 3%, unless you start going down to the drier areas where the organic matter starts to fall. But one of the outcomes is that, as actually you realize, and we've done this a lot with our work over the last few years, is that when you test the available nitrogen in many of our soils, it's actually quite significant, the amount of nitrogen in our soils. And often the yield potential of these soils is actually phenomenal if we can get the nutrition right, and that includes liming. So we are working from a very high base, and you'll often find in some trial sites that some yields without fertilizer in some cases are significantly high because of this amount of nitrogen in many of our soils compared to other areas. So there are organic matter maps on the portal.
Hello? Yeah. The other question, I don't know whether you can see your questions, Jeremy. The other question is that it's asked by Eric Dowait. He says that the 10 countries mapped so far, with only 700 samples. How was the sampling strategy implemented for each country? And how do these affect the accuracy of the extrapolation, as location error will contribute to the nugget variance? What would you suggest with regards to bounding interpolated outputs to reasonable distances from the sample food points and avoid arbitrary cutoff or stretching extrapolation? Jeremy, hope you could also have seen the question, sorry.
Couldn't see the question.
A little bit of a long question, so I just forwarded the question to you. You should see it in the GoToWebinar panel.
Okay.
I can repeat if you want me to repeat.
No, I think I got it, Philip. Thanks. So I think it was around sampling strategy. I think the best way to answer this would be just to maybe share the sampling strategy with those that are interested in after the webinar. It's not my specific area of speciality, and I would defer that to the data science team who coordinated the sampling. But it's essentially based around different covariate layers, which informs us on how the key to being able to do a good sampling strategy is to make sure that the samples that are locations that are identified best represent the area in terms of being able to extrapolate that information across a wider area, and then also doing validation by doing a holdout on a certain number of the samples across the county to make sure that the maps are actually giving us the right information at each and every sample point. So, but the details around the sampling strategy and the validation, I'm happy to defer any of those questions after the session to our data science team.
Okay. The other question still to you, Jeremy. I think your presentation created a lot of interest, which is good because that was the objective of the day, to give that introduced to the soil maps. How do you control the variability due to season or time of sampling, given the different growing seasons, weather trends? And this one probably will go together with another question, which is asking about when the soil sampling was done, bare fields or crop fields. So probably those will be answered by that one question. Yeah. Karibu.
Yeah, the timing of sampling. Well, I mean, for anyone involved in sampling, it's definitely advisable to do sampling in the dry season because sampling in the rains is not effective and extremely challenging. So we always try and do our sampling when it's dry. And yes, that does affect, a bit like I mentioned about sulfur. It does affect some of these nutrients that are more transient in nature. We haven't mapped, for example, available nitrogen because that actually changes within even a season. We have put sulfur in the maps, but we must understand that sulfur is, is a component of mineralization of organic matter and residual sulfur in the soil, so it will be greatly affected by rainfall. What you see on the maps after some heavy rains like we've had in the last few years, actually the sulfur levels could be much lower. So our recommendation on sulfur is actually is testing sulfur in the field and being able to make a decision based around sulfur fertilization closer to the season because of its transient nature. So, but for all the other parameters, they're fairly stable over time. And so we wouldn't expect any real challenges around those being done in the dry season versus in crop season.
Okay, let me also acknowledge the question was asked by Dr. David Kamau of Caro, and also Abdallah is the one who had asked about also the season, whether it also matters. The other question is from Abdallah, what is the soil test value interpretation class of different nutrients? Is it low, medium, or high? Thank you, Jeremy.
It's a very good question. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done on accurately defining the point at which a soil test value moves from responsive to non-responsive. I think that's something definitely that we as an industry need to work on. This is called nutrient response curves for different soil test methods and different parameters. Our work and the work that's available in the industry is still not well harmonized in terms of different labs using different methods for soil analysis, and therefore a phosphorus result of 20 in one method might mean phosphorus results of 30 or 40 in another method. So I think that harmonization is really important. So we've tried to avoid the use of very low, high in the use of these maps, and try just to give an indication of the relative level of each parameter. And that helps then, like John said, is to target the research, and then at the local level, then figure out which levels are actually indicating a response or no response to a given intervention.
Thank you, Jeremy. The next question is to all the panelists, and the question is from Tom Nyamwea, and the question is, what is the efficiency of the current government position on only subsidizing DAP rather than focusing on multi-nutrient fertilizers with other nutrients, nitrogen, phosphate, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, zinc, etc., in line with the role of the minimum? He also indicates that such products are in the market. He has given an example, which I don't need to go to. Welcome. Anyone who can probably attempt to answer that?
I can answer that a little bit. I was wondering if PS was still on and whether he would answer. But we've, like I mentioned in my introduction, the government has— I
can also answer it after Thule.
Okay.
After Thule, I can clarify.
Okay.
Thule, go ahead, whatever you wanted to say, then I'll come.
We've made a deliberate move away from subsidizing specific inputs and have now allowed for the National Value Chain Support Program, which is our pilot of the National E-Voucher Program, to allow farmers to select the inputs that, that are suitable for the value chains within which they're supported for. So if you're in the rice value chain, potato, coffee, etc., But then we've stipulated an amount that they can spend, so, and can withdraw against a preferred fertilizer that they require, for one, or have been advised, for example, from the soil testing and then the mapping and nutrient requirements for their area as well as for their value chain specifically. So we have moved away from stating specifically one single nutrient fertilizer or a specific type of fertilizer. I hope that answers. If PS wanted to add or expand.
Okay, thank you. Somebody wanted to comment further? Karibu.
And the mood is to move away from subsidies to incentives. So the National Value Chain Support Program is an incentive program. It will not be there forever. Once they know we need to test so that we pick the right kind of fertilizer, we expect the private sector to make sure that the prices remain low like they are today, so that there's no need for us to come in and intervene to subsidize anything. Instead, we try to bring the best practices to the farmers through incentive programs that are meant to basically graduate the smallholder farmers into commercial producers. So like the cohort that we will start with after 3 years, we expect to have weaned them off and look for another group so that we expand the program. We don't have resources to subsidize everything for everyone. So right now the policy is away from subsidies, away from DAP towards what Thule has explained, and it's in our ASTGS. And the last time we bought fertilizer was like 2 years ago, and I think that will be the last time. And what is being released right now from the godowns is the leftovers of that time. And we also experience a lot of dead stock because of this blind buying. So you tie a lot of money in dead stock. So we are moving. And I think the key thing to this is to make it affordable for the smallholder farmer to test their soil, and to make it easy for them to access these soil testing services so that they don't invest their resources blindly. I think this will be key. And I think fertilizer companies should also come in to make sure that we move together and support the farmers to make the right decision, even as we market our products. And I feel the need for very strong collaboration between public, private sector. We are all serving the farmer. And just responding to Muriuki's comments, we are not going to repeat mapping just for the sake of mapping. The cultural scientists can look at this data and see whether there are any weaknesses, and vice versa, so that all the studies that have been done are consolidated to give the status of soil in Kenya. They could even produce one publication with the different methodologies addressing the different gaps, so that we move together as stakeholders. And Jeremy, I hope the platform will be available also for researchers, postgraduate students of soil science to start interacting and interpreting the analysis much deeper. And I hope you'll also put the primary data somewhere in the background for people to explore.
Thank you very much, Bwana PS, for the contribution. It is good that to bring it to the participants that the government has moved away from the blanket buying of the inputs and has been opened up to more targeted support to the farmers. And I hope also that the people in the industry will also contribute that by also supporting in carrying out soil sampling and soil testing, so that their clients can also benefit from their fertilizers, from their products. Thank you very much. And the other question we have is from Richard Wick. to Joseph. And the question is that while we all agree that liming is important, subsidizing lime is often talked about, but more important is the lime ability to change the soil pH. Rather change the subsidies from lime application to soil pH change. Can this be done in Kenya? Joseph?
Sorry, I didn't get that clear. Can you come up again?
The question is, well, we agree that liming is important. Subsidizing lime is often talked about, but more important is the lime ability to change soil pH. So he is giving an example of Rwanda, where they targeted the subsidy was to application from lime to soil pH change. So how can we change? So we'll be talking of the change of the pH, not only the lime application. Could this be done? Could it still be through lime or whatever? So this, we wanted you to, your comment on that, your thoughts on that.
I don't know if I got the question right, but one thing that has happened is that, you know, for stockists to start stocking lime, they need to get the demand from the farmers. So what has missed here is where the agronomists have not had, you know, the pressure from the farmers to stock the product so that it is easily available for the farmers. So that's where we have a bigger challenge. And what needs to be done is first sensitization to ensure that, you know, the farmer knows he needs the lime, and then he can push the agro dealer who is next door to stock the product so it's available for the farmer. Not sure that I got the question right.
Okay, probably is how more we can be able through also the route of educating farmers that we are addressing the pH, not just the application of the lime. So is probably what you said when you talk of the how and when and how we apply the fertilizers and such. It's more using it efficiently to address the issue of the pH. We can move to the next, and this is more of a comment from Lillian Budia. To Joseph again, but this is a comment. I would rather this is more of a comment is that the agree farmers to be educated on lime application. They also need to be informed on different types of lime for both the powder lime and granulated lime, their differences and how and when they can be applied. So I'll take it probably more of a comment, or you have any comment, Joseph, on that?
Yeah, that is the true position. I mean, kind of confusion. One, the farmer doesn't know which kind of lime to apply and in what form lime should be applied. And I think the panelists will agree with me that lime is more important in powder form because then you get the benefit much quicker than when lime is in granule form. Thank you.
Yeah, at this juncture, I would want also to encourage the participants also to ask other questions if it's possible to the other panelists. We had a lot of questions to Jeremy and also to Joseph. If there are any other questions, you can also bring it up for the others. And somebody is thanking Jeremy for the good presentation. And then the question is, what was considered in selecting a farm to be sampled for the soil testing, and how many farms were sampled per sub-county to develop the draft soil maps that you have presented in the web portal? To Jeremy. But we don't know who asked the question, but I think it's Abed Kiwia is the one who asked the question. Jeremy?
Yeah, I think it's similar to the previous question around the sampling strategy. So as I said, I think it would be easier to share any technical procedures after the webinar. But it was in the region, there's a sampling map on the, there's a sampling tool on the map where you can see where the samples locations were.
Yeah. Okay, there is a question from Henry Ogora, and this one may go to the panelists, and his question is, what is the soil testing capacity in Kenya and farmers' access to this service? Anyone to answer that?
Do you want me to answer that? Well, I think the soil testing capacity is good. I think the problem is awareness and helping for making more farmers aware of the importance of soil testing so that they are buying the right fertilizer, or conversely, working with financial institutions who are financing fertilizers to make sure that the right fertilizers are being financed, because what we don't want to be doing is financing inputs that are actually the wrong inputs, because that would obviously be a problem for the long-term viability of the farmers. So I think there's different players who can play a role in pulling soil testing into the process of supporting smallholder farmers, not just the smallholder farmer themselves. But a recent survey has said that a bit like PS Borger said, is that less than I think 5%, even probably lower than that, of smallholder farmers have ever done a soil test, which is staggering to think. That means that so many small farmers are using fertilizer without knowing what is the right fertilizer for them to buy, or whether they need lime or not. And that goes back to an earlier question, is that if we buy fertilizer and our soils are acidic, then the fertilizer actually gets locked up in the soil. And so differentiating the lime policy and the fertilizer policy is not something that we want to do. And I'm really happy to see through the e-voucher scheme that it's an integration of liming and the right fertilizer, because putting those together is where we'll really make an impact.
Thank you, Jeremy. We have a question to Joseph. We have a question to Joseph, and this is from Dr. Mary Nzomo, who is the CEC, Trans Nzoia, El Kameri. This is it is good to know that we have people from the counties. The question to Joseph is, the biggest challenge with lime application is the bulkiness and lack of lime application equipment at farm level. What efforts is the company putting in place to enhance applicability, like producing granulated lime? Joseph?
Thank you. We understand that lime is in powder form and it is very difficult to apply. But again, lime is best applied in powder form so that you get quicker results. The challenge with lime in granules is where you're increasing the cost of lime, which makes it more expensive to the farmer. So I'd rather farmers adopt lime in powder form that is cheaper than go for lime in granules, which is more expensive. But again, we've been trying to speak to the agro dealers. One is to try and find out their capacity to probably acquire lime spreaders, because they are very closer to the farmers. And this can become a business kind of, where they buy lime from us as our stockists, and they're able to also hire out their equipment at reasonable rates to help farmers in spreading the lime. Because we still believe that as much as we want to go for lime in granules, that lime in powder form is more effective and is much cheaper compared to lime in granules. So you get also quicker results when lime is applied in powder form. So it's just the logistics of application. We're trying to work with the agro dealers just to see if they're able to buy this kind of equipment to hire out to the farmers. I know that CropNuts have done that. They could be having an equipment in the North Rift, which is being hired to the farmers at a reasonable rate, and farmers are using that to help them in lime spreading. So yes, we want to go for lime in granules, but that to me will be meant for maintenance. But where the soil treatment is required entirely, I think we still need to apply lime in powder form. Maybe what we need to look at is how do we acquire the equipment to be able to support or help farmers sort out their logistics.
I could just add, Philip. I think one of the major uses of these maps could be or would be understanding the hotspots in terms of soil acidity. One of the problems with lime is, as we all know, it's bulky. It's difficult to transport. Any lime player like Homer Lime wants to transport in bulk because of cost of transport. So I really think that something we've been discussing with Homer Lime for many years is setting up lime depots in areas with significant soil acidity problems, so that because agro dealers find lime difficult to handle in most cases, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's very bulky and they only have limited space in their shops. So if we are to set up lime depots in hotspots of acidity, create the demand with soil testing, and then involve the private sector contractors who are going out to do tillage, they can have small lime spreaders. Then you have a sustainable business model for driving the liming of agricultural farms, and I really believe that that's a model that we need to look seriously at.
Yeah,
Thank you,
I also
Jeremy. That
need,
is a good point.
let me also,
Maybe-
let me also add, Jeremy, I don't know whether I missed it, but the issue of soil carbon, soil organic matter. When I did my little demo farm, actually we didn't correct using lime. And this is the question I asked the KeFERT guys. Are we going to add lime? Instead, what we did, we used manure to correct and balance the soil carbon, because the soil carbon was also low. Carbon and humic acids, as I know, also acts as a buffer to stabilize, because if you just add acid or base, you are going back and forth. But if you retain the soil carbon, practices that retain the soil carbon, then it actually buffers the activities in the soil. So I don't know whether in your data you showed anything to do with how the soil carbon is, because that will indicate the buffering effects of the soil.
Jeremy?
Yes, so we measured soil carbon in the form of organic matter, and those maps are available as one of the parameters. But I agree with you, organic matter can substitute to a certain degree to lock up exchangeable acidity, but often it's there's a lack of availability. And also with lime, obviously you get the added benefits of the calcium and magnesium, which are the nutrients which are so low in these acid soils.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And we have one or two more questions. The question is from Godfrey Bogwa, and he is asking, how long will the soil maps be valid for? Is to Jeremy. It's an interesting question.
So we are developing a framework, as a consequence of this, IFDC. So I could probably defer this to Mercy Kamal of IFDC, who's going to be coming up with a framework for building out and building on top of the work done so far in terms of harmonizing procedures and policies around sampling and future sampling. But in terms of the validity, I mean, it really depends a lot on the soil types. Obviously, certain areas with sandy soils, the changes in fertility happen much faster compared to areas with more buffering, more clay soils. So it's a really difficult question to answer. But I think the important thing is that this is not a one-off type of a program, and that we actually use this as a foundation for continuing to add data through this harmonized policy, which if Mercy's there, maybe this is a good time for you to say a few things on that if you wish.
Probably either or probably John. He was on the panelist, whether if he has anything to say, or probably could be discussed later. It could be brought up in future. John, anything to add on that? Okay, then we proceed, and we have that. Sorry, we have. Yeah, John.
Can you just give me a little better clarification on the question, please?
The question was, how long will the cell maps be valid for? And I think I would also want to bring Jeremy to ask the question he was asking to IFDC. Jeremy, can you repeat what you are asking, Mercy? John probably can clarify.
John, I was just pointing out that one of the outputs of this, together with the stakeholders, is to develop a framework for building on the work so far done, and that would also include a frequency of sampling and how we're going to add new samples into the database to make sure that the maps are valid.
Yeah, and I think, when we consider some of these deficiencies that are not even being addressed, when you talk about boron, zinc, sulfur, copper, it's liable to be some time before farmers start using those nutrients regularly, such that it shifts substantially the quantities of nutrients in those maps. So I would say easily 5 years would be my first estimate. And as Jeremy says, as putting new data into the portal from analytical services becomes more routine, the maps should begin to update themselves.
Okay, thank you, John. And I think we have gone beyond the time we had set to 12:30, but probably for 5 minutes more or so, or 10 minutes maximum. I would ask probably some of the panelists. Muriuki, you had a question on correlation. If you could put it very briefly in a bullet to Jeremy, and Jeremy be very brief on the answer, if any, or you could say discuss that. Muriuki.
Yeah, what I was trying to ask Jeremy is, since from the different soil types, we know each particular soil type has its own physical and chemical characteristics. From the chemical data, was there found to be any relation between the soil type and the lab data? Was there found to be any correlation between the two? Because in the past we used to, once we know the agroecological zones and we know the soil type that is there, one could be able to tell be able to estimate maybe the deficiencies and the toxicities that could be in that area, and then you come out with a more appropriate fertilizer for that particular soil and crop. Then before you answer that question, just because I have this opportunity, I just want to make a general statement. I wanted to make a general statement that since we are talking about multi-nutrient fertilizers, we should try to make sure that farmers understand these multi-nutrient fertilizers their prices, because you have added other elements. The price should not be compared with the traditional or the fertilizer they normally use, because you find that farmers, if you come out with a multi-nutrient fertilizer, they want to compare the price with the DAP that they know or CN. So that whoever is, I would ask our extensionist to make sure that is clear. They should never try to compare or expect the multi-nutrient fertilizer to be priced the same as the traditional or the common or the commodity fertilizer that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Muriuki. Jeremy, if you can answer very fast, so that in a minute or so.
Sorry. So thanks, Eustace. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's important because there's two very different things here that we're looking at. One is soil type, and we have very well-defined soil type maps of Kenya. That's work that was done many years ago, and we have a soil type map where we know that we have different types of soils, and those different types of soils translate into different chemical, physical properties. So there, of course, must be a relationship between soil type and soil fertility. The objective of this was not of this study, and we haven't looked at that correlation so far, but it's very clear, and it should. I would be very worried if there was no correlation, but there's definitely a correlation, because even if you looked at Siaya there, you could see the change, the huge change in soil fertility within that one county, and that's very well represented by the different soil types within that county as well. So the purposes of this program is really to highlight the level of those deficiencies in terms of all the different individual nutrients, which I don't believe has been done in this way before, to make it clear of what those problems are. And I think it would be a nice thing to have in the portal a base layer of those underlying soil types, so that users could also see how soil fertility status is indeed correlated to the soil type itself. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy. And at this point, I would want to indicate that we have more questions, and which we have received, but because of time, we might not be able to go through all of them. But we promise that all the questions will be exported and followed up with the panelists for answers, and will be shared later. So bear with us that time did not allow for all your questions to be answered. Thank you. And now I would want to call Dr. Anthony Eselaba, who is an Assistant Director, Natural Resources Systems in Kenya Agricultural Livestock and Research Organization, to give us highlights in a summary form and the next steps of what came out of today's discussions. That will just be having the closing remarks. Anthony, karibu daktari.
Okay, can you hear me now? I've unmuted, but the organizers need to unmute.
We can hear you.
Okay,
yeah, we can hear you.
First, I'd like to thank the organizing for giving me the honor of doing the synthesis for you people. It's been quite interesting. Only 5 minutes. I don't know how I'll manage, because I have more than 10 pages of information here that I've written, but I'll try my best.
Please try.
I'll start with the first.
Yeah, we'll share later.
Yeah. Can you hear me? You can, eh?
Sorry?
Can you hear me, I hope?
Yes, now we can hear you. It wasn't.
Go ahead. The camera keeps going on and off. I'll try and rush through. Jeremy gave a very good presentation on digital soil mapping, project between IFDC and CropNuts. We gathered some valuable information on soil mapping and why soil mapping and their ongoing project. He showed us a few challenges in mapping and gave us a few examples from Siaya, Central Kenya, and so forth. Now, we had a statement by the PS, Hamadi Boga, on soil mapping and data. Then we also had some report from Tule, I think, and so forth. What I'll do is, just to avoid a lot of things, there was a panel discussion, there are a few issues that came out. I'll just give you 7 or 8 points on the way forward. The first point, you can get it, there is need for a synthesis and consolidation of studies conducted in Kenya. We have attempted to do that under the Kenya Soil Health Consortium, where we produced a book of abstracts on research conducted in Kenya for the past 90 years. Now we need to go a step further and do a synthesis. There's a lot of information in that book of abstract that needs to be synthesized. Secondly, we need to coordinate all the national activities on soil mapping. There are a lot of projects going on in the country, in the ministry, in CARO and various CGI within Kenya. We know we are going to have new projects that will create information hubs through the EU, the Netherlands government, CIMIT, and various stakeholders. So we need to look at this and coordinate all this in the country. I would like to suggest, I'm not being a bit selfish, but I know for most of those projects, CARO is coordinating or will be coordinating. Maybe we could start with CARO as a coordinator. Then we also need to harmonize the methods and procedures and involve all stakeholders in the mapping activities. We have all kinds of activities going on all over the country. We need to harmonize that. We also have a lot of data from the FAP and all those studies that have been conducted over the years. We need to also synthesize that. Now, how do we also inform policymakers? I'm glad the PS from the ministry and other stakeholders are around. I've had a few being mentioned. There are others I may not know are around. We need to work with them, and we need their support in this endeavor. Now, when it comes to the lime industry, we need some support for market areas that require lime. We already know from CARO that it's mainly Western Kenya and the coastal zone. The CARO data shows that it's 13% of the country that needs liming. But recently, working with CIMIT, they say from the African soil information data, it's only 7% of the country that needs liming. So we need to clarify that by ground truthing and data analysis. Lime also, we need to know the methods of application. I heard we need to broadcast, maybe point source or microdosing. We need to apply the principles of 4R stewardship in liming also. Now, I've realized now soil testing, we've not had an inventory of capacity in Kenya. The last inventory I did was actually in 2008 for AGRA, where we did a consultancy for AGRA on an inventory of soil testing and soil scientists in Kenya. The report is available with AGRA. We did that as CARO. So we need to redo this again, an inventory of soil testing capacity in Kenya. And we need to assess the training and the capacity building needs of existing human resources and labs. Now, finally, we also are running into a problem with our Kenya Soil Survey. The Kenya Soil Survey was very well equipped in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but we have not updated the soil survey maps. We need to do this in relation to soil fertility maps. And as Muriuki says, we need to correlate the underlying soil types with the soil fertility maps. That's all I can say for now, and I hope we captured all that as a summary and way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shiraba. There was a question on the CARO role going forward, and I think you have mentioned it as you are doing your summary. Thank you for that. We don't need to bring it up for now. Thank you, and thank you for agreeing to do the synthesis of the webinar. We appreciate, and this, you inform the participant that this will be included in our summary report later. Thank you so much. It will be shared with you. Now, as we go for the closing remarks or vote of thanks, I would want to promise that the webinar is being recorded and will be sent to all the participants soon after this meeting. We also going to set a follow-up questionnaire, which will be sent to all of you. And we want to emphasize that your feedback is very useful to the team working on the maps. Then the KeFERT and the organizers hope that this will create interest to the stakeholders, that is all of you, to contribute towards the development of the soil maps and in form of relevant data, all in funding. So we could think of how do we mobilize funding for this work, and especially to cover the whole country. I think is very important. As we have been informed that the portal will cover 21 countries. More work is therefore needed, and this one probably should be worked out, and we see the people who could be willing to jump in and contribute more. Also, we say that also contribution could be in form of relevant data. We have a good example from Morioki, who said that Mayor Limited, through their laboratory, has carried out a lot of work on soil tests, but that information has not been put out there for use and also Cairo. So it would call for a collaborated effort to come and improve on the mapping and the work on the mapping. And at this juncture, on behalf of Kenya Fertilizer Platform and the organizers, I thank you all for finding time to participate in this webinar. We hope KeFERT will be engaged in such webinar meetings in future, and we hope that most stakeholders are welcome to bring up issues which need to be addressed. And KeFERT looks forward for support of such events. As I know about KeFERT is that anybody can bring issues related to the fertilizer sector and can be addressed through this forum. Thank you very much, and thank you all for finding time to be with us. Thank you. Asante sana. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.